This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, Kenzium, and Velixo. You can learn more about how our sponsors work with Acumatica by going to augforums.com/sponsors. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Friday, September 25th, 2020. This is episode number 25, Acumatica versus Sage Intacct with Misty Palek, Senior Accounting Implementation Specialist at UHY Advisors. Misty, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome. I'm grateful to be here today. My name again is Misty Palek, and I have been mostly a construction accountant for the last 23 years. I have a degree in business, and I'm working on a second bachelor's in computer science. So that's always sort of been my baby. And if my mother were alive today, she would definitely say that I'm sure it has something to do with computers, Misty. So I talk about that a lot. But yeah, I've been with UHY for just about 6 months now, and I like how they are software agnostic, and it's been a really fun journey just watching them bloom because they are a new division within UHY, which is a CPA firm.
Well, first, on being an accountant, as a fellow accountant, my condolences to you.
Right. Yes, I get it.
But I think the construction side is at least a little more interesting because you get to deal with projects and things. So hopefully it sounds like you're excited to go to work, and if you're even working on a second bachelor's related to it, sounds like you love what you do.
Definitely. I'm very passionate about it also. I do have 7 brothers and 1 sister in that order. And I'm pretty sure that's how I ended up in construction, because those were my people. You know, it just sort of fell in my lap way back when. You know, a temp agency placed me at a bridge contractor a million years ago, and I traveled the country with that bridge contractor just being a job site office manager. And it was so interesting. And in fact, that company also was awarded the biggest federal project ever released, which was retrofitting the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. So I got to be part of that, which was pretty amazing. And very interesting too, you know, and I think that because I have so many brothers, it always worked out when I was on site with 300 men, because to be honest, there's not a lot of women out on a job site, but I would be on site with 300 men. You definitely had to know how to handle yourself and, you know, not take any crap, basically, of just march in there and say, I know what I'm doing and it's going to be fine. And we're doing this, by the way, guys. So my husband will sometimes say that I'm bossy, but I just think I'm directive. And I just roll with it that way. And I blame it all on my brothers, you know, of you have to be. When you're in a big family, you just have to be assertive, and you have to, you know, make decisions quickly. Otherwise, you're going to starve to death. I can tell you that much. You just got to go.
If you don't eat fast, you don't have any food.
That's exactly right. Yeah, just because you're the last kid doesn't mean you get all the leftovers.
I love thinking about potential statistics, like questions I'd love answers to. I'd love answers to the few women who are in construction, how many of them had a significant number of brothers. You bring up a great point there.
You know, it would be a really interesting statistic. You're right. I bet a lot of them. I really do, because it's just those are my people. I totally get it. You want me to boss around men all day? I can do that. You know, like, it's always worked for me. Yeah. So, you know, and then I moved to Iowa. Let's see, I've been here 18 years now. It's hard to believe. And when I came out here, I worked for a general contractor who was in the ag industry. And that's how I got into the ERP world. I started out there, and I used to call it my sitcom because it was me and 9 guys, believe that. That's how we started, was me and 9 guys, and they were never going to grow and they were never going to change. And by the time I left there 11 years later, they had 48 employees, and they had grown from $8 million in sales a year to $56 million in sales a year. So they had grown really rapidly, and they actually sold out to a Canadian company, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and that's when I went out on my own. But when I first started there, they brought a box to me of CDs, and said, here is Sage 100 Contractor. Our CPA says you need to implement this and then train us all on how to use it. And I went, oh, well, that seems like a good challenge. I guess I could manage that. So then I spent 11 years learning the program and understanding how the dots were connected in the background, and always had a passion for the technology side of things and just how databases were built and how they functioned. And so naturally, that's just the progression that I made over my career.
I'm curious, since you mentioned CDs, was there also a manual with it? And if so, did you read it?
Can I say hell no? That's a big hell no. I'm terrible.
I think it's a good answer. Well, I think it's a good answer because I feel like the people who actually learn ERP products don't do it by walking through the manual. It's just not the way you learn it. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but at least to me, the people who really know products kind of explore their way through it rather than get taught their way through it. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I never determined if, again, back to statistics, was it just because that's the way I learn versus some people can pick up a book and read the manual and then know exactly what to do, but I can't even understand it. Like I might use it as a paperweight or a door opener, but that's about the extent of it. I just don't learn that way. It's kind of trial by fire.
That's how you got into ERP there. But before that, was it always in-house, or I might have missed the part about, were you at an accounting firm before that, or was it always in-house?
Always in-house.
Okay.
Using, back at the bridge contractor days, they used JD Edwards. And so we'd have to, enter the time for the men in the field to get paid. And that was always fun. Collecting time in the field is a hard job. It's a really difficult job. But, I became familiar with equipment allocations and all of that good stuff. But then, after I left this company, I really went out on my own for quite a while. And I got hooked up with several different VARs who needed Sage 100 contractor help. And then I also got introduced to Intacct at that time. So that would have been 3 years ago. I got introduced to Sage Intacct, and I'm certified in all these products, which I'm grateful to have good test taking skills. And that's been
right.
Really
you don't have to read
interesting
the manual to be able to pass the test, right? That's another good point.
No, you have to know how to use the product though, because it's challenging if you don't know how to actually do that. But, and then, I've actually implemented a couple Intacts. I haven't gotten the luxury to implement an Acumatica one because I keep trying to get on that train, because it's sort of like I am able to see the bigger picture, which I feel very blessed about, but I can see that Acumatica is the future. And it's very interesting, the path that I've taken of, I got on the Sage Intacct train because it was easy and it was available. And then I'm slowly been trying to get on the Acumatica train in different areas of my life. And I can't say that I'm truly successful yet, but I'm getting close.
So your current firm that I think you said, you mentioned you've only been there about 6 months. Was that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They represent Intacct currently and also Acumatica currently, or you're working on?
They're actually software agnostic. Yeah, they're software agnostic.
Okay.
So they're really outsourced accounting more than anything. And the reason that they hired me was because of my technology brain mostly, but the ability to offer the best solution for the client. Like it's about people, process, or technology. And the ability to just really say, look at this client situation. Do they have a current software? If they do, is it working well for them? Do we need to change the people or the process or the technology? Like those are the three areas that my department, which is Client Accounting Advisory Services, CAAS, is really good at. And so they brought me on as a software person or an ERP system person to say, what is the best solution for the client? And I get to learn, I get to be intimate with these clients, and the fact that I get to learn their processes and their people and their technology. And then I get to say, okay, well, here's my recommendations. And this is how we get to the next step. Is it Intacct? Is it 100 Contractor? Is it QuickBooks? Is it Acumatica? What is it that would be the best fit for the client? So they're really software agnostic, but I like how they focus in on the client and what is the best situation for the client, not just trying to sell software.
I like that. And I think accounting firms are really good at that. I think that's why back in the 1980s, Mass 90 and Solomon, big reason they grew so well is because they got into accounting firms, right? And
Yep.
I'm curious, I've always been curious to learn more about the thinking in an accounting firm about that. For you all specifically, it sounds like you didn't go off and form a separate company. Sometimes they do. It's just a separate department.
Right.
And then
Yes.
You're focused on providing the best solution. Does that mean you would partner with another Intacct or Acumatica VAR to actually sell it? Or do you actually become a VAR as well?
So Intacct has something called the SIAP program, which is the Sage Intacct Accountants program, I guess. So they allow accounting firms to, if we had to sell it, we could, but we are not a VAR. And Acumatica, from my experience, has not had that SIAP program yet. They haven't had an accountant's program, but I know several other Sage products do have it. So it's just a matter of time before someone figures it out, right? Because accountant firms, they don't want to become a VAR. They have no interest in that. That's not where they make their money. They're a service industry. So they want to get in there and do the actual service for the client, and that's where they make their money.
Interesting. But you would still be the point of contact from a support standpoint. And
Correct.
You're right, that doesn't fit the Acumatica model currently. That'd be great to see them, especially with all the construction they've gotten into.
I know.
Them start to
it's exciting.
add that more and more. Huh.
Yeah, it's really exciting. But yeah, and I know, like I said, lots of other softwares do it. It's just that's usually how the accounting firms work.
I'm curious then, if I can dig into that a little bit, what's the difference between being a VAR or being part of that accountant program?
It's not, so in my opinion, a VAR is like a car dealership, and they're going out and they're selling a car. Once that car is off the lot, maybe they don't have a service department and they're not interested in servicing that car. Whereas the accountants program, we mostly do accounting for these firms, like outsource CFO, outsource bookkeeping, these roles that we play with these companies. We're doing their day-to-day work. And so I'm sure we get some kind of kickback if we introduce them to a product and we say, okay, we believe that Sage Intacct is the answer for you. I'm thinking that the accounting, I don't know the details, but I would say that they get some sort of kickback to say, okay, this accounting firm chose Intacct, and now they're also going to do the work in there. So they're not only going to sell the car, they're actually going to do the service and maybe even drive the car. If that kind of makes sense.
So the margin part could be the same, but what I'm hearing is what sounds like a key difference to me is you are likely already providing services before they purchase the software. You're already billing
Correct.
them.
Yes, probably, most likely, yes.
I actually wish more VARs did that, because I think a problem
connection.
that happens a lot is a VAR gets in and they're just trying to race through to close the sale because their model is not to get paid for that process. And so they want to get it wrapped up so they can start billing the client. And that's what leads to, in my opinion, a lot of times a mismatch between a client and a product. So I kind of like that
Absolutely.
process of you engage sooner and you're really a client now. You're not just a prospect. And even if you don't buy the software, you're still a client during that. That's interesting.
You're not just a used car salesman anymore.
That's actually the same analogy I use as a car sales for a VAR.
Like, for real.
I totally agree.
Yes. Yeah. Cheesy, very cheesy.
Well, that's interesting. So the division you're in now, that's a brand new division, it sounds like?
It is. Yes, it is. It's only been around for about 16 months. And it's driven by Kane Polikoff, who is my manager, and he's a fantastic guy. He's really cares about his employees and his people and the clients. You know, he just really cares. So it's nice to be part of that division. But what's interesting is Kane kind of started this train, and then all these other divisions, because UHY has offices all over the country, and there are other CAAS departments popping up everywhere, which has really been kind of fascinating to watch them grow. Like there's one coming out of St. Louis, because my headquarters is out of Detroit. Even though I live in Iowa, my headquarters is out of Detroit. So so it's been really interesting to just kind of watch it unfold and bloom, as I say.
So I think I'm hearing another difference there between an accounting firm and a VAR, and that VARs tend to, at least nowadays, they're not as geographically focused. Sounds like an accounting firm is a little more geographically focused the way they organize it. You've got multiple departments in the different regional areas.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Interesting.
And then there's multiple channels too, you know, like my focus has always been construction because of my brothers, but you know, so it's just been convenient. But there's other verticals. Construction, if you ask me, construction is the only thing. But if you ask other people, there's obviously other channels.
And from my understanding, construction's been doing very well the last few years, right? Things have been, at least when I drive around Columbus, Ohio, I see people building all over the place. That's my evidence.
Yes.
From your standpoint.
Yes. You know what my theory is on that too, which is kind of funny. But what I've seen really happening is one of two things. Like the industrial people, the construction companies are going in and putting up, you know, COVID requirements. So they're going in and putting up walls instead of cubicles, or plexiglass to divide people, or moving desks around and walls around. And then the residential people are going in and putting up the walls back in the houses that people tore down because they like the open concept. So those walls were there. You know, they knocked them all down, and now they're going to have to put them all back up. It's been quite funny to watch. Like, how interesting. Because people discovered that they couldn't work at their dining room table with the kids in the background and the dogs barking, you know, so working at home became much more difficult without those walls. That's
so true. That's what makes the world go round, right? Fashion's the same way. You just wait long enough, it'll come back around.
That is so true. Hang on to your bell bottoms, people. Yeah, so that's been real interesting.
I think it's also interesting at your firm that so you're fairly new there. Even the department is fairly new, and it sounds like really what triggered it was Sage Intacct. And my assumption there, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sage Intacct is really good at talking to accountants and getting them interested in it.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And we could definitely get into the differences between the two products, and you could kind of sort of see why, or, you know, my opinion anyways, or my take on it. Like, why would one company choose one product over another?
So let's do that. I think before we dive into the details, what I think is interesting is it sounds like you're enthusiastic about Acumatica, and what I find funny is that Sage is just really good at talking to accountants in general, not just with Intacct, but I think in general. And so they get an accounting firm interested in ERP with Sage Intacct, but then it doesn't take you long, especially on the construction side, to find Acumatica. And I just find that funny. It's almost as if Sage is recruiting Acumatica partners in a way. And that just makes me chuckle a little bit. But
I'm sure there's some of that going on. Yeah, and I would say definitely.
So for you, as you've been looking at the two products, if we take it up to maybe the super high level first, both are SaaS products, as I understand it, correct?
Yes.
And so both of them, you're just using a browser to access it from a technology standpoint. Then one difference, though, there, I think, is that Intacct is only a SaaS product, in terms of deployment that you have to use their cloud, whereas Acumatica, you can use Acumatica's cloud or do it on-prem or a third-party hosted environment. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe take me through some other, those are my starting points. Take me through some other high-level differences before we get into modules and things like that.
Definitely. And maybe at a high level, you know, you could talk about what Sage did and tell the story behind Intacct, which is a pretty interesting one. And I don't know if, well, this is what I believe. I think that construction spurred the purchase of Sage Intacct. Like, I think that what happened was, so Sage Construction Division, Construction Real Estate, has a product called Sage 300 CRE, which is the old Timberline product. And that Timberline product, what they did was they were developing it so that it was on a SQL platform instead of a pervasive platform in the background. And they realized soon on that this would have been like in 2017. So that, I feel like that year is when Acumatica really started to get momentum and they really started to take off. And so Sage is sitting over here looking at that going, okay, well, let's watch them a little bit longer. So Sage is always late to the party, okay? Like every dumb time, in my opinion, they are always late to the party. So they're looking at Acumatica going, okay, what are they doing that's making them successful? And in my opinion, it was that Acumatica saw the avenue to get into cloud software, right? Like being on the cloud, a true cloud product. They saw that avenue before a lot of other people and realized that that's the direction they needed to take. And so Sage, and I don't know if it came from the construction department, but I have a feeling that it did. And the reason is because in the old Timberline product, which is a Sage product now, there are about 50 or 60,000 clients in the United States alone who are on that product. And they realize that it needs to go to the cloud. It doesn't have that capability by itself. You either have to host it somewhere or on-prem. So it doesn't have that true cloud capability. So then they started searching for companies that could offer that true cloud platform. And they found Sage Intacct, because Sage Intacct has been around, or Intacct has been around since the 90s. So, you know, and it was cloud from day one. They've never had an on-premise solution. It was always cloud. And Sage saw that and went, well, this could be comparable to Acumatica. We could be mid-market competitors with this product. So they halted construction or production on the 300 revamp, Sage 300 CRE revamp, and they bought Sage Intacct for like $850 million in 2017. So Sage is really, really good at that, in my opinion, is what they do, because 100 Contractor and Sage 300 CRE, they just buy programs. And when they buy it, they buy the company culture, they buy the employees, they buy everything. So they just come in and they see something being successful and they're like, we want it, how much? And so they threw down a check, you know, for $850 million and said, we want that product. And they halted production on 300 CRE. So at the end of the day, the goal was, in my opinion, is to push all those 50 to 60,000 clients, sunset 300 CRE, and push them over to Intacct CRE. So they just released Intacct CRE. It's actually just been released third quarter. So just like this month, it's just been released to the general public that you can actually buy it now. Whereas they've been working on it for the last year and a half. And I've even gone to construction real estate headquarters for Sage. And I was there when the launch party, when they launched it to the VARs. And I kind of chuckled and went, okay, no way in hell is this product ready. Like, what are you guys thinking? Like, this is going to be a disaster, you know, and I still don't know the answer to it, because it's going to take us years to figure out if this product really is going to be comparable to 300 CRE, or is it even going to be, you know, even in the same parking lot as them? I don't know the answers to that, but There's obviously other verticals. I just talk about construction because that's what I know. But Acumatica has made so many advancements, and not just, even in the construction industry, one of the biggest comparisons I could say about Intacct for construction versus Acumatica for construction is payroll. Acumatica released payroll in January, and that was huge because Intacct does not have payroll, and it will never have payroll. They actually go through a marketplace partner, and you can get payroll for sure, but it costs almost as much as Intacct. And to construction companies, I don't know how they would do that. Payroll is the currency of construction. Man hours are the currency of construction. If you don't have that baked right in, then you're gonna have a terrible pie, in my opinion. Because then you're gonna have to outsource it. You're gonna have to journal entry it back in to get your job costs. It's a big whole nother mess. So I think, but the advancements that Acumatica is making, they're going to be hugely successful. And that's the reason that I've been trying to get on that train for so long, is because I can just see it coming. I could see that, it's greener meadows ahead, where Intacct is going to take forever to catch up. And that's what I'm saying. Sage is always late to the party,
I like the construction focus. I think when we say Acumatica versus Intacct, I think that's very insightful, that really you're talking about Acumatica construction versus Intacct. That's the appropriate way to talk about it. And
I agree.
I completely agree with your Sage assessment. I like to call them, they're not really a software development company. They're more like a mutual fund for software, right? They're really good at acquiring and selling, but then how do you actually add on to it? And Intacct, I think, started around 97 or 98. Does that sound right?
Yes.
1990.
Might even been 99, but yeah.
So right about 10 years earlier than Acumatica, but to your point, it wasn't construction until just this month, right?
Correct.
And that's an interesting insight that, in your opinion, Sage's eye for Intacct had to do with construction, but it didn't even have construction yet. And if I look at Acumatica, who is a software development company, even John Roscoe always talks about 70+% of their employees are in product, whereas Sage, it's probably less than 10. That's my guess, %.
Agreed.
And,
Agreed.
Acumatica just innovates really quickly, and they're only a couple years into construction, but in Sage years, that's probably more like 10 to 20 years, 2 years.
Agreed. And then add construction on top of that. Construction's always behind the ball.
And another thing I think that's interesting to me is you look at the current president, not to get political here, but the current president who's very real estate oriented. You could say real estate, it's not a surprise it's done well. Well, if we have a change in presidents, Sage is getting into the construction game at the wrong time. And then you throw COVID on top of it and all that, and the economy going down. So I think that's very interesting. You're excited about Acumatica. I'm curious, when did you first hear about Acumatica? You've been in your new position about 6 months. Were you excited about it even before that, or is it when you got into your current job?
No, I've been excited since about 2017. I knew that this was coming, and it was kind of ironic how I heard about it, but it was from a third-party vendor. They're called lienwaivers.io, to give them a little plug. They're a great little company, but they have a program that is developed for contractors who need lien waivers. So it can communicate with, 100 contractor or 300 or whatever. And that, my friend over there, he emailed me one day and he's like, hey, you ever heard of Acumatica? I think you should check it out. I think it's the answer to the future. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And so ever since then, which was about in 2017, mid-year, I've just been trying to get on that train, find out more. How can I get involved? How do I get certified? Who are these people? I just need to know more. And as I get more involved, I just realized that there's so much further advanced than Intacct, and they've just made great strides, not only in the construction industry, but just the technology industry. The fact that they offer, on-site or on-prem a solution as well as hosted or cloud. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else is doing that. And, you know, I mean, sure, I could name a couple of advantages that Intacct has over Acumatica just in a general standpoint, maybe from an accountant's perspective, but they've made such great stride quickly. I feel like Acumatica is moving mountains, of which it took Sage, I don't know, probably 50 years to get there. You know, like Acumatica is just moving at such a fast pace that I like it. It's exciting. It's cool.
Well, I'll throw another one at you I totally agree. The fact that you can deploy wherever you want. And the other key there to me is that it's the same product. It's not
right.
It's just where you install it. It's the same set of code. And I think another key difference there is that Intacct, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, they host their SaaS solution in their own server environment. At least last I heard. Do you know if that's the case?
Right. You don't even have access to it. It's true cloud software. Like you
but
don't
in the sense that on the background, I think they're managing their own server farm.
Correct.
Last I heard.
Yes.
Whereas Acumatica's server farm is deployed on AWS, so they don't deal with the whole hardware arm of it. And if you look at, to me, a great example of why that matters is if you look at Zoom. Right now, I'm using my phone for audio to talk to you because when I try to use our internet, my two kids are doing online school through Zoom calls. We're doing this recording on a Zoom call. Zoom with COVID just totally ramped up in usage. Well, how did they do that? It's because they mostly deploy on AWS. And same with Acumatica. They can ramp up from an infrastructure standpoint because they're not having to deal with all the hardware side of it. I think that's another key difference between the two products.
Agreed. Yeah. Yep. That's well said. Should we talk
so
about go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we should talk about one major difference, like technology wise, or actually it's accounting wise, because, you know, hey, listen, we're both accountants, we get it. But we should talk about dimensions. We should talk about dimensional accounting, because this is something that Intacct has that I've never seen in those specific terms in another product. Like most products, sure, they have ways to sort stuff, but you don't have control over those ways. For example, Sage 100 Contractor, you know, you have your jobs, you have your employees, you have your clients, you have all of these, you know, divisions between your data, but you have no control over it. Where Intacct has what's called dimensional accounting. And at first they threw it at me and I said, what on earth is this? Why would you do this? Like, this seems so crazy because these dimensions that they have in there do not hit the books. They are literally, I describe them as a hashtag that you're assigning to a transaction so that you can later segregate your data and slice it and dice it the way you want it. So it's really for reporting needs, so you're asking yourself, well, why does that even matter? Because when you look at the chart of accounts, and you know how businesses will have, okay, so the first 4 digits are like the GL account, the second 3 digits are the department, and then maybe the last 4 are the job or whatever, you know, segregation that you have within your chart of accounts. This allows for a very condensed chart of accounts because you no longer need those departments. You no longer need those jobs. You no longer need any of that because you're using dimensional accounting to tag your transactions where, you know, when you're running reports, you just do it by a dimension. It took quite a while for me as an accountant to get my brain around that, you know, like, what is this? But I can't even begin to tell you how powerful it is. Like, I've seen, you know, companies that I've implemented who started out with 12 pages of chart of accounts, double-sided, and you're thinking to yourself, why do you have so many chart of accounts? Well, Intacct does this dimensional accounting. We got their chart of accounts down to 1 page. They literally had 1 page. So it just helps, you know, keep your data clean, cleaner, more clean, I think. And I've never seen anything like it. So it's kind of grown on me, to be honest, which is going to be kind of hard to give up if I go to another program. It already is hard to give up because I'm like, oh, I can't use dimensions here. So it's very interesting how it's changed, I guess, accounting wise.
I've heard of dimensions as being a big strength of Intacct, and I myself, I'd like to poke and prod here to see if I can understand it better. It sounds to me like, are you really taking down attributes that you know about a transaction down to the individual debit and credit level in the general ledger?
Yes.
And is it something that you have to manually do, or is it something that just that hashtag, it automatically gets picked up based on how the transaction flowed through the system?
Either or. It could be either or. You can create dimensional relationships. So if you pick this job, it always goes to this cost code. Or, if you always pick this account, then it goes to this employee. So you can create relationships in there too, which is pretty cool.
Interesting. So you have a lot of flexibility. It's almost like a workflow control over it.
Absolutely. And the possibilities are endless, right? You can have as many as you want.
And you're not actually, I assume, you're not storing them as a bunch of columns in the debit and credit table from a structure standpoint. You're just aware of the relationships, but rather than you having to go get it, and I think this is the struggle, and this must be a key reason why Intacct talks to accountants so well. So to me, a huge struggle that accountants have with ERP systems is they just live in their general ledger, and they're just not aware of how to link it up to the rest of the rich data in the system, and dimensions seem to solve that.
Yeah, that's really well put. Yes. Maybe that is the answer, or the key that they're using. It's like nothing I've ever seen.
Let's take an example. I'm curious to learn more of how you configure it. And part of why I'm curious is I'm curious to know, how could it be done in Acumatica with the pace that Acumatica runs at, and how quickly they can develop things. How could someone do that even as a customization that Acumatica eventually puts in the core product? So what if I took an example? Let's take a simple one, like an accounts payable bill. If I enter that bill, and then what's the word in Intacct for it? Acumatica calls it release. Do you call it post? How do you get that to hit the general ledger?
You post. Okay. At the time you're entering that AP bill, you're entering dimensions.
Without maybe realizing it, or you're consciously doing it?
You're consciously, well, you can set it up either way. If you're doing it manually, then you're choosing a job, an employee, a location. You're choosing a dimension. But you can also set it up to say, if I select A1 mechanical for this vendor, then I always want it to go to this job, this location, this employee, this dimension. Does that make sense?
And can I do it where it does that behind the scenes as one option, and maybe I have a second option to override those values? They're just default values? Both
of those things can happen. Yep. You can set it up as a supervisor, so you can say, well, like I said, if you select A1 mechanical, it's always going to go to this job. But you could set that up in the background for, like, say, employee expense reports. When you're doing an employee expense report, and if this employee is doing an expense report and they pick a job, you always want it to go to a specific cost code. But you could also set it up to where they can override it. It's just a default. It's an offering.
It sounds almost like they double as custom fields as well, and that you could add them as many as you want to the AP bill screen.
Yes, they are kind of that way. And they don't hit your GL, right? They're just for reporting. That's their only purpose.
So you're not duplicating the data and cluttering up the GL, but sounds like a key point is that you're making them available in the general ledger accounting world. Otherwise, the accountants aren't comfortable with it unless it's talking down to the debit and credit level.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just like nothing I've ever seen before. And at first it was really weird, but Sage Intacct coins it as, this is not your mother's chart of accounts. And I love that. I think that's so funny. Right? It's like, yeah, they're right. It's not my mother's chart.
That's true.
My mom was not an accountant. Yeah, funny.
I've always struggled with that personally. It's like you know you have this data set somewhere else, and then you see an accountant bloat their chart of accounts to track the same information just because they're tracking it in the general ledger that you're comfortable with, you know? It's like sales down to the product level, for example. You want to know sales, maybe not at the SKU level, but at product category, product line. That's a common way people want to see information. And you can get that out of the sales ledger, but accountants can't get that out of the general ledger without, I'll use the database term, joining over to that information. And they're not comfortable doing that. So they just add a segment to their GL account. And then there's all this manual work to make it happen.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what, that's what I'm saying. It's pretty cool, I have to admit. It's really grown on me.
I'd love to see Acumatica do that somehow, and I guess we don't have the time to dig into more details there, but I'd love to learn more how that works and see, you know, I'm just curious how close Acumatica is to being able to add that feature in, you know, at least step one of that feature.
I'm 1000% sure that Acumatica knows about it and that they're probably already working on it in the background. Don't you think?
I would think so, especially how heavily they've been into construction the last few years. And now that Sage finally released the first version of that, I would agree.
Which is a hunk of junk, I'll be honest. I have to say that. Like, how did you think this was going to work? I just don't even know.
So we hit the dimensional side, which is really general ledger. If we maybe then just jump right into the construction side, I think one reason why Acumatica launched so quickly is they already had a projects module, a fairly decent project accounting module, and had one for years. I'm curious, did Intacct already have that before their latest construction release?
Yes, they did. And that's been my actual complaint for a little while now since I've been involved with the construction side of Intacct, is that you know, they charge quite a bit more money for this construction package, but really what they did was add a couple of dimensions and a couple of like contractor specific things such as retention, and I mean, everything else was already there. And I don't know if, you know, looking back, if Sage saw that, they were like, well, this product already has a lot of similarities to what Sage 300 has for construction. Let's just, you know, relabel it and then charge our customers even more money. That's what I think happened. They're like, oh, we'll just, you know, because I've been complaining about that. I'm like, you're going to charge my customers what? For 2 dimensions? You're adding 2 dimensions and you're telling them, you know, that's 18 grand? That's absurd. So it's been a really interesting.
I feel like from a technical side, Acumatica did the same thing. They didn't do it from a pricing standpoint, but it was already there in projects. And it really came down to relabeling and creating reports like an AIA report and adding some features like subcontracts and things like that. But it mostly was already there with project accounting. A lot of it was terminology. I think what's funny about it is that the way Acumatica did it is they spun up a new team out of Portland, Oregon, where Timberline used to be. I've been Timberline people, and they just ran with it as a customization. And because the Acumatica platform customization engine is so strong, they were basically able to make a product. Even the manufacturing product was just a customization for years. And they made their own product, but a lot of it was just relabeling. They were relabeling stuff. And that started to become a problem because it wasn't consistent with the rest of the application. Well, now in 2020 R2, they've brought that into the core. And when they did that, they renamed a bunch of the stuff back to what it was originally. But it sounds very similar to me. I think the big difference is that Acumatica has done that just in the last 2 years. In Sage years, I really think that's like 10 to 20 years just because they're not a software development company. They're at the step one, where Acumatica was, and their pace is just going to be a lot slower, I would imagine.
As with everything, you're right. Yep. They take a snail's pace, and they're always going to be behind the curve because of that. That's why I've been so urgent about Acumatica. You know, like I've seen the strides they make, and I said, well, I got to get on that train.
So what else would be missing for you? Let's say you were willing to give up your dimensional accounting for a specific client. And I think we can also talk about what do you see right now when you go into a client, when you would recommend one or the other. But for you personally, if you were to pick Acumatica on an engagement, you're going to have to give up your dimensional accounting, at least for now. But then what do you get? You mentioned payroll. What are some of the other construction things that you get that you don't have an Intacct?
Lien waivers, AIA billing forms, although Intacct does use Word for just like QuickBooks online. You know, it uses Word as its, what do you want to say? Like mail, it uses like mail merge fields to create an invoice or whatever that you want. So Acumatica has all those capabilities already, but the bigger one is certified payroll, union reporting. Like that is giant in the construction industry. I mean, there's so many of those types of companies out there that need both of those things. And hey, my little program, Sage 100 Contractor, you know, that I've fostered for so many years and I'm very passionate and help a lot of people with, it has all that capability, but it's not cloud software. And it can be hosted on the cloud, but it's not the same, you know? So you definitely gain a lot that way, where even Sage 100 Contractor can't do multi-entity. So you cannot share your chart of accounts. You can't share your customers and vendors and all of that stuff. So I see that the big advantage with either Intacct or Acumatica is that you gain that multi-entity access and capabilities. And then Acumatica, I don't know, it just seems like it's comparing a dinosaur to a dog in some ways, because I feel like Intacct is sort of dinosaur-like. It's not modern looking. It's very archaic in how you navigate through it, where I feel Acumatica has a better aesthetically pleasing look to it. So you gain, you know, not only looks, but guts too, in some regard. And I just think it's more capable. In the construction side, you know, you need all those documents. Those are very important documents that you can't get out of Intacct. So I see that being a big, you know, selling point for Acumatica versus Intacct. What else?
What about things like, so for me, I'm not as heavy into construction. I have one sister, no brothers, so I'm just not that into construction. Like, what about change orders, subcontracts, things of that nature?
Right.
Is that there in it currently?
No. Subcontracts, what they did was they relabeled. So they took the purchase order module, duplicated it, and called it subcontracts, added retention and a couple other construction specific fields, which was totally lame in my opinion. But you can, you know, accept progress payments against that subcontract or whatever. So that's cool. But Acumatica, you know, all that information is there. Change order management has not been released yet because they can't figure it out, which is huge also to construction companies, where Acumatica does it beautifully. I've seen it in action. I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
Well, to be fair, it's just version 1. So yeah, so maybe they'll add that in.
But think about what they did in version 1. I mean, think about what
Sage did, or what
Acumatica did in just version 1. You compare that to what Sage Intacct did for construction version 1, and it's pathetic.
Sure. It's like comparing a straight line to a X squared. I'm thinking of algebra from high school. No, like to an exponentially growing line. To me, it's not just about, to your point, it's when you're comparing the two, it sounds to me like you're not just comparing where they are now, you're comparing their trajectories, right? And that it's not just where they are on the chart, it's the rate that they're, you know, where they pointed 5 years from now or something like that.
Yes.
That's a big difference.
Yes. And I've always been fortunate, again, just to sort of see into the future and watch all this happen in front of me and go, yep, I know what train to get on. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to find a way.
So it sounds like you're pretty gung-ho about Acumatica. I mean, what's next steps for you to get more involved with it? Like, what's just looking for that right client where it seems like a good fit for them?
Yes. Or taking on a client who already has it so that I can actually learn the accounting side of it, to say, there's, and as you could attest to, there's a lot of difference between just implementing a product versus actually doing day-to-day accounting in there. There's a lot of difference between the two. And I feel like that's often the disconnect between implementers and the actual people who have to do the work is, that they've never done it themselves. They've never had to do accounting in there. They're technology people and they go in there and okay, I installed the software. Cool. Good luck. And then they walk away and then nothing ever happens. And the people go back to Excel because they have no choice because their implementer doesn't understand accounting. I see that a lot. And so, my advantage point has been, I know both sides. I've worked in industry for a very long time. I get both sides of the picture and I'm able to come together as liaison to help people, figure out, okay, here's a software, here's how it works. And this is how you actually do an AP invoice. This is how you do a purchase order. This is what happens when you don't close out your purchase orders and you archive your company, like all these things I'm able to help them with because they don't have anybody like me. And that's what I see over and over again. So to get on the Acumatica train, I need to find a client and bring them through UHY to where we can do their actual accounting and help them. So I can get some experience behind the doors of, okay, this is how they do their AP. This is how they do their purchase orders, To
your point earlier, you're not just going to service the car, but you'll drive the car if the client
That's
needs it.
right.
That's a good analogy.
And it's going to be a Lamborghini.
Well,
compared
Misty,
to a Pinto.
I'd love to dive into some more details. Just quick time check here. Do you have another 15, 20 minutes to keep going?
Yeah.
I love where this is headed.
Yeah, I'm good. Actually, I have nothing this afternoon, but some custom reports.
I've got to take over with the kids here in about half an hour, but I could go another 15, 20. That sounds like you're very knowledgeable in this area, and I think this is a conversation that more and more people are going to be interested in as Acumatica continues to get more and more brand recognition. And this comparison that construction companies are going to go through is a very common one. Maybe, but what if we took it from this angle? Let's say you walk into a client and they're looking at new software. Let's say they're on QuickBooks, growing organization. They know they've outgrown QuickBooks. And you're starting to think through Acumatica versus Sage in your head. What are some of those key questions that you would start asking?
Well, probably the first one is, because to be honest, construction companies, like I said earlier, are sort of behind even Sage in their progression and their thinking. Like it's very difficult to get construction companies to trust the cloud. And they get pretty freaked out when you start talking about it. Of course, there are some bigger companies who are okay with it and they're moving forward with it. But most companies, even in this day and age, are nervous about hosting it on the cloud because what if something happens to the cloud and then they have no access to their information? Or in construction terms, say I'm out on a job site out in the middle of a cornfield and I have no choice to use, a hotspot on my cell phone or a hotspot, what do they call them? MiFi, that's what my family calls them, as a MiFi. But they have no internet. So how are they going to access their data? So if it were a construction company, that would be the first question that I would ask. Like, where are you thinking that you want this installed? Where Intacct, that would eliminate Intacct immediately. If they said, we need an on-prem solution, because all these construction companies, to be honest, still have their servers and they're perfectly content with their servers. They don't care that their stuff is on the cloud or that, they do online backups and that's good enough for them. So that would be my very first question is, what are you thinking about, installation of, do you want this on-prem? Do you want it hosted in the cloud? Do you want it true cloud? what is your vision around where we're going to put this? And you could ask the same questions about QuickBooks too. Do you want to go to the online version? But to your point, Tim, is QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop are two very different programs, and they don't even have the same functionality. So, you would be giving up a lot to go from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online for a contractor. You give up a lot. And is it worth it to your company? And you always outgrow QuickBooks. It's the next logical step. So that would be kind of my first question is, where are we going to put this thing?
So let's say that I respond, I'll be the pretend client here. So let's say I respond, oh yeah, cloud all the way. I'm modern person taking over the business from my father, and I'm all about cloud. So then where do we go next?
Right. I would say, well, now we have two competitors. We have Intacct and we have Acumatica. So tell me about your day-to-day accounting. I don't care what the CEO is doing. Eventually I'll ask them, what is it that you want? How are the things that you want? How do you get those is the next question is, what do you want? How do you get it? And what's it for? So I'm asking about the people who enter accounts payable invoices, the people who process payroll, the people who do the AIA billings. Like those are the questions, those are the people I want to talk to, because those are the people that you have to convince that it's the right solution for. And based on their reaction and their comments, I would say, well, okay, Acumatica has all these features already available to you. The bugs are already worked out. Even though it's release 1, the bugs are worked out. It works very well. Or you can have, Intacct over here, who is a good solution, and they have dimensional accounting, something I've never seen before. So, that's when I would get into the nuts and bolts of it to say, okay, what are the day-to-day users going to do with it? How are they going to use it? Because those are the people that you have to cater to. And you know what? If the CEO wants a cool dashboard or whatever, to get their data, as long as you're giving them the data, they're not the people who enter this stuff every day. Of course, there's those one-offs where you got a mom and pop shop and they're doing everything. I've saved a lot of marriages by taking on the accounting, just so you know. But, so you get right. Do you know what I mean? So you get to the point of who are the day-to-day users and what are they going to do with it? How do they operate? And that always comes back to people, process, and technology, which is like CAAS's model. This is people, process, and technology.
Yeah, you got to get into the requirements, you got to get into the workflow, and then you've got to be able to show that in both systems and let them compare the two. Yeah.
Right.
Trying to think of some other easy ones other than that's a great starting point to, from a high level, you compare where it needs to be deployed. But after that, I'm just trying to think of some other easy ones. Maybe price point, just to know ballpark what their budget is. I don't know how the two products compare when you compare construction, Acumatica's construction. That's probably another.
They have a different platform
general
altogether.
Ballpark one.
Yeah. Acumatica's pricing structure is much different than Sage's. And
is Sage still pricing per user for Intacct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And maybe even a fee for digital entities as well, legal
correct.
Entities.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's sort of hard to compare the two because it's, like comparing a Lamborghini to a Pinto. Let's see. There's some benefits to both. You're going to pay on that Lamborghini for the next 10 years, or you can buy this Pinto for $500. You got it. You're good. Let's go. It runs. It might be ugly, but it runs.
Well, that's probably more like comparing Intacct to Timberline, right? The Lamborghini to the Pinto.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a nicer car, BMW.
It is almost it's a struggle right now, I think, for people looking at Acumatica, and that the pricing is so different and that it's transactionally based. And I can see that being an advantage for you over a VAR, in that a VAR has to do a lot more work especially for a construction company. That's a lot of times, well, tell me if you agree with this, a lot of times they're not quite as data savvy.
Correct.
In terms of metrics. They might know their profit, they might know some high level financial metrics, but true like data metrics that are not just dollar driven, they're usually not as savvy in. Would you agree?
Very much so. Yeah, they have no idea.
So then just to give them a ballpark price for Acumatica, you got to start asking like how many AP bills per month and how many GL transactions per month, and they just kind of look at you funny. Whereas a VAR is trying to rush to the sales process and they hit a snag there, you're able to consult through that process and you're not in a rush because you're still getting paid for it. So I can see that being an advantage for you.
Plus, when you think about accounting services, like outsourced accounting services, those are all of our questions. We are asking so that we can give them a nice proposal. Say, how many AP invoices you doing? How much payroll you doing? How much AR you're doing? So it's very similar to the model that outsourced accounting firms like CAAS uses. It's a very similar, mindset. So it works better for me, honestly, than just, okay, here's a bill for $36,000. Have fun. What does this include? I don't know.
I never thought about it from that angle. That totally aligns more with an outsourced accounting firm.
Right.
Great point. I love it.
So it's actually better. And, like other companies, for instance, like Procore and Co-Construct, all those like project management software companies, they do the same thing as Acumatica. Sage is, one of the few that's left. And, QuickBooks actually does that too. When you sign up for a new QuickBooks Online account, it asks you those kinds of questions so that it can give you.
It's definitely a trend. Acumatica was a little earlier to the party, right? But yeah, I agree. Yes. It's a trend that others are doing as well.
And subscription based too, like people don't buy, you don't get a box with CDs in it anymore. Like that's pretty outdated.
Right. Very interesting.
It is. It's a great time to be alive. It is a great time to be alive.
It's definitely fun. I'll say about Acumatica specifically, I haven't worked with Intacct, but about Acumatica, it's a fun product to work with just because of the pace of innovation and the excitement in the community. And yeah.
Well, to be honest, everybody's sick of Sage's crap. So they're like, ooh, a new shiny thing. This is awesome. And even though Acumatica has been around for 10 years, so the buzz is wearing off, but people are realizing that it wasn't just mirrors and smoke. Like there was an actual product there that was actually worthy of their attention.
And that took a long time. They started in 2008 and they did not take a smoke and mirrors approach. Yeah, and it took a long time for people to realize that. But now once they did, I agree with you, around 2017 is when they really started to get noticed. And then people opened the hood and realized it's a Lamborghini engine. Yeah, and then word gets out. Yeah.
Yep. It's nice. I like it. I love it. It's great. I'm excited to get my feet wet in there to, okay, I've gone through the certification process and that's been great. And, I can fake it till I make it, but I really want to get my hands in there to say, okay, well, let's tinker around with this car. Let's find out what it does. What happens if I push that button? The red one. I want to push the red button.
That's how you learn it. Just don't press it in a production environment, right? You're fine.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Since we're both reporting geeks, it sounds like dimensional accounting's an Intacct strength. I would assume when you say reporting, you're talking about more of a financial report writing tool. You mentioned Word as well for form designers. Maybe you talk to me a little bit about the reporting tools available in Intacct.
Right. So they have what's called what is it called? ICRW. I don't know what the heck that stands for, but it's a report writer, intercompany report writer. I don't know exactly what that stands for, but anyways, they have like a separate, I can't say it's a Band-Aid, but they actually put this other program in there that uses, XML for language. So it's very intuitive and it learns. So it's a lot of AI, which is pretty cool. But, it will learn things like, well, the last time that you did something similar to this, you put this dimension to this, like you can create your dimensional relationships in there, and it learns. It's very smart. So they have an interactive report writer, and it is a separate fee, of course, because that's how Sage does it. You know, but if you want mustard with that, you got to pay an extra fee. So but they have an internal report writer that uses the dimensions. But what is really powerful in both programs is the dashboards. And how I always say about the dashboards, you know, I set up a lot of custom dashboards for people, and I really enjoy that as a report, as a way to report. But what's interesting about that is how I describe a dashboard is like, imagine getting in your car and you look down. Apparently I'm into cars, right? So I look down at my dashboard and say I don't have one. I don't know how fast I'm going. I don't know if I have a flat tire. I don't know if I'm almost out of gas. You know, I don't know if the check engine light is on. If you don't have a dashboard, how do you know these things with your company? How do you know, how fast your company is going? Do you have any flat tires? Do you, is your check engine light coming on? How do you know? Well, you don't without a dashboard. So, I spend a lot of time in the dashboards in Intacct, as well as, that's like the show and tell right there. So, and it's really just a report. You're just building an interactive report. That's all you're doing. So as a report nerd, I really enjoy that side of it because it's visual too, right? I can drag and drop, I can filter by dimension, I can, add charts and, fun stuff like that. And the cool part is that meaning that it's interactive, guess what? If I want to see what makes up that slice of the pie that's 20%, guess what? I double click on it. I go to all the entries that make up that amount. I can drill down into the dashboard, which, not a lot of programs have that capability. They are all catching on. Like, people are starting to understand, like, oh, it's about the dashboard. We got to have a dashboard for this program. So they are catching on. Even QuickBooks Online is catching on. They're just not quite as savvy as Acumatica or Intacct's dashboards.
So it sounds like both, from a dashboard perspective, do have true dashboard, what I call dashboard engines, in that you're not just selecting from some pre-canned dashboard widgets, but you can build your own and calculate the KPIs that you want to calculate in both products.
And as a report nerd, you could even say, to do that in a report is almost impossible. To connect all those tables together and then perform calculations on those tables, good luck. You're going to need Excel for that.
Agreed, because they're so disparate, right? Reports
Yes.
are good at having one common data set and summarizing that data set. When we say reports, we're talking about printable reports.
Correct.
But dashboards are good at just isolated, just like Excel is, individual cell calculations. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds like the financial report writer might be a little bit stronger in Intacct because of that dimensional accounting. And it's interesting that there's actually two options there. One you pay a fee for, that's smart, and one that's more basic. Then when it comes to those printed forms that you do need a lot of in construction still, Acumatica's got the report designer, which is like a much more trimmed down version of Crystal reports. What about Intacct? You mentioned Word. Is it only Word, or do you have other options?
No, it's got an internal report writer, the extra one, so you can create things from scratch. Again, it's built on an XML platform, but I don't know exactly what the engine is behind it. I just know it works. And you can do calculations in there and all that good fun jazz, but it's like a wizard you follow. Okay, if this field, you add logic, if this field is going to equal this, then you're going to put this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, and this is what I was saying earlier, that Intacct is a little bit old-fashioned looking to me. It's not modern, which is surprising because they claim, because of dimensional accounting, that they're very modern, and I just don't see it on the backside. Like, are you sure? I maybe think you put some makeup on and called yourself modern.
Lipstick on a pig, right? That's
right. Yeah.
What about data access? So also thinking about it on a reporting standpoint, being able to get access to my data. One thing I like about Acumatica is just like Intacct when you're talking about the SaaS product. And most, to be fair, most new Acumatica customers, the vast majority, are using the SaaS product. And the upside is you don't have to deal with the environment, but the downside is you don't get access to the database. And people who are data geeks, they can't write their SQL statements. Yeah. So the way around that for Acumatica is you can make anything, you basically construct a SQL view and a generic inquiry, you make it available over OData, and you can suck it out of Acumatica. Does Intacct have something similar, or do you have to like write the report in order to get the information?
You have to write the report.
Okay.
There's no, well, okay, for example, in Sage 100 Contractor, it's an on-prem solution, but it has an internal report writer that you have SQL statements that you pull together to make a report, but it also has a query function. So if you didn't want to make a report and you were just not doing any calculations, you just needed raw data, you could have access to queries. You don't really have access to your backdoor data. That's up to Sage and they control that, but you can definitely pull your data. But Intacct, it's kind of the same way, I guess. It's kind of the same way that you're describing, not like Acumatica. You don't have access to your data.
So you can construct a query,
yes,
but then you're going to have to export it to Excel. You can't go the other way, like with an OData connection, where you start from Excel, point it back to the system so that you can refresh the file without having to manually export the data. There's an import-export functionality, so if you dumped out your AP invoices, you changed something and you dumped them back in, there's that functionality. But a lot of what is happening now is their marketplace, like Intacct has a marketplace. So you go buy another, and they're very stringent. Sage development team is very, very stringent. Like they don't just let anybody on the bus. Like you have to go through a lot of requirements to get on that bus. So what they do is they have an open API to these specific developers and, companies like, say, CloudGen, which is a service product, or Service Trade, or Workforce Development, or Workforce Go. So they have this open API that they have developed a connection, but it's up to the developer. It's not up to Intacct. It's up to the developer to develop the API connection where you can just hit import, you hit a button and it syncs up, basically. So it has the capabilities. It's just up to the marketplace partner. I think you hit on another key technology point there. My impression of Intacct is that it's more of a black box and you only talk to it with the APIs versus Acumatica. You can actually develop inside the framework. You're a first-class citizen and you can modify almost anything in the application rather than being an outside citizen who can only talk via the APIs. Is that true of Intacct, or is there some way that you can actually develop inside the Intacct application?
That's very true. You cannot do that. You can't, like I said, you have to be a Sage developer to even make that happen. Now you can create some views, which are a little bit different. Like if you wanted to see on your job screen, say you want to see all the sales invoices that are associated with that job, you could create a view, like a custom view, where it brings in a view of all your invoices. But it's kind of dashboardy, like you're dragging widgets around, So you can't really change the program. It's pretty set in stone, and you don't have access to the back door.
I was first looking for new products. I was on a Sage product at the time back in 2012, Sage 500, formerly Mass 500. And I think it's funny you mentioned Sage 100. I think you called it Sage 100 Contractor. Is that right?
Right, yeah. It's not the Mass 90 product. It's
yeah, a lot of Acumatica partners are familiar with Sage 100. I don't know what's called. Sage 100 for distribution,
ERP.
The old Mass 90. ERP, that's what it's called? Okay.
I think it's called ERP, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I know that confusion happens all the time.
So I used to say, well, the product, the product I work with must be 5 times better because it's called Sage 500 instead of Sage 100.
Oh my gosh.
But the irony was that it was not, because it wasn't going anywhere. They only had 5,000 or 6,000 customers. And so that's when I started looking. And when I was first looking, I was looking at NetSuite, but it just felt like too much of a black box. I wasn't looking at Intacct, but I just couldn't get a feel for how it really worked. Whereas Acumatica, it's just so wide open. And I was even able to get my hands on an installation file and install it. And that open versus closed culture and mindset, I think, is another key difference between the two products. And I think a lot of that has to do, a lot of that is responsible for the excitement level with the Acumatica product because of how open the philosophy is.
It's like comparing Linux to Windows. That is how I'm looking at it. Like, Linux is open, where
I could
Windows,
see that. Yeah.
You can't change it. It's a black box. You're right. Well,
when I was in college real quick, when I was in college and I was asking my roommate who was into Linux how to explain it to me, and he explained it like this. He said, in Windows, if you need to get a file, you go ask someone to go ask someone to go ask someone to get that file for you, and then bring it back through the same people. With Linux, you just go get the file yourself.
Wow, what a great analogy. That's really nice. Yes. Yeah,
But sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something else. Go ahead.
I was going to tell you the story about the funny story about 100 and 300. So you have Sage 100 Contractor, used to be old Master Builder product. And then you have Sage 300 CRE, which is the old Timberline product. And constantly people are asking me, well, what's the difference between 100 and 300? 300 must be better because it's a 300 versus a 100. And I have to tell them constantly, like, it's not the dumb cousin. Okay, these were two totally different products, not even related. They were not, you couldn't even compare them. They were competitors. And Sage decided to label them. And foolishly, there's also another Sage 300 out there that's not CRE. And foolishly, I think that, Sage named them 100 and 300 because of their user capacity. Like, that's how they determined what name they should give it. 100 is really... Yeah, 100 was always for like people or companies that had 100 or less users, whereas 300 was really meant for the big companies, which I would actually agree with. I don't argue that at all, but it doesn't make it any lesser of a product because it has a lower number. And I constantly
I've never knew that. I always wondered where the numbers come from. Interesting. Right. That does actually make sense. But
it does.
I always look at it from a functionality standpoint, and I think most people do. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a hood of shame. I don't know. I hate it. Like, why do you do that? Could you not be more creative? I mean, literally, could you not be more creative? Yeah, so it's real fun.
That's funny.
Yeah. Anyways.
Well, I really appreciate the time. I think I'll have to wrap it up here shortly, but I'll just give you a chance. Anything else you'd like to add to this, what's been a awesome conversation about Sage Intacct versus Acumatica?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered all the gamuts of, if anybody knows a client out there that I can get my feet wet in, please shout out to me. I would love to talk to them.
I'll drop your contact info on the links in this episode.
Very cool. Okay.
Thanks.
Well, awesome.
Thanks, Misty, for coming on today.
Yeah, that was really fun. All right. We'll talk soon.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening and take care.